Good morning, everyone, and happy Monday. Again, I'm Denise White. I'm here with CML as the Communications Engagement Manager. I'm also joined today with our presenter, Karen Goldman. Just wanted to make sure everybody's in the right place. We are here for the third of our election series in our webinar series around elections for signature verification, ballot format, and canceling an election. So as always, I know we're going to get a ton of good information. So before we get started and we dive right into that, I just want to kind of fill in some general housekeeping duties. So to our elected officials out there who registered, you will get 1 university credit for training today. For our clerks, we know we've had some questions in the past on this one. Just want to make sure that you know that you can fill out a form at cml.org on our For Clerks page, and that form will get you half a credit with CMCA. So you'll get a half credit for each webinar that you attend and complete that form for. This is a newer form. It's a Google form. You can use the same form for every session you attend, but you will have to complete a new form for each one. So use the same link that you'll find on cml.org. I'll drop it in the chat here as well as we get going. And then you just pick the date of the session, complete the assessment, and Kathy Novak will get that over there at CMCA. If you're new to GoToWebinar or format here, you should see a little control panel on like the right side of your screen. And when you've got that, you should be able to see like a little orange caret. If you click on that, that gives you a little control. You should see the chat box. You should see the question box. We will take questions and chat either way in real time. So as Karen presents, we'll make pauses so we can answer questions that go along with the slides you're looking at. I will be moderating those. Karen will be answering those. You don't want me to try to answer those. So, and then, yeah, just add them in real time and we'll try to get to as many as we can through the presentation today. As with the past ones, we will put the recording online at cml.org, again with that link for the CMCA credit, with the recording as well as a copy of the slides again. And finally, thank you all. We know how busy everybody's day can be, particularly Mondays. So thank you for joining us and being our partners in learning about elections and how to run a good election. So on to our presentation. We've got Karen Goldman, a familiar face for many of you because she's part of our Colorado Municipal Clerk Advisor Program and is available continuously on our listserv and through that program to answer your questions and provide insight and guidance on particular issues that arise in your municipalities. Today, she's here to talk about elections. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Karen, to let's learn more about ballot order, mail ballot signature verification, and canceling an election.
Okay. Thank you, Denise, and welcome everybody, and Happy New Year. I hope everybody had a great holiday season, and now that it's 2024, you're ready and raring to go. So by now, for your statutory towns, your nomination petition should be circulating. I hope you've had people who are interested in picking them up. And your calendar, of course, should be long ago completed. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about 3 topics that you will need to deal with before, once your nomination petitions are submitted. They are signature verification on the nomination petitions, the format of your ballot, and what you need to know if you're going to cancel your election. So Denise, I'm going to ask you to go to the next slide, please. Okay, I thought what I would do is do a little bit of recapture of the procedures involved in signature verification, and this is signature verification on nomination petitions. I know we use that term in regards to mail ballot elections, but here we're talking about verifying the signatures that have been placed on nomination petitions. So what that means on nomination petitions is that what you're doing is you are comparing the names and the addresses against the names and the addresses on the voter registration list. And for this purpose, you are not looking at the way the signature is written. In fact, doing so to qualify or disqualify a signature is not permitted in this process. we don't have anything in Title 31 that addresses this, so we go back to Title 1, where it states in the citation I give you in the second bullet that in order for a signature to be valid, when a signature of a registered elector is required, the name and the address must match the information that is on the voter registration database. And what is really important is that the address matches. In other words, that the person is appropriately and legally registered to vote. The names, not so much. So that's why we say that nicknames, shortened names, the use of middle names when people sign the petition are not enough to disqualify any signature on the ballot if you can be assured that the person signing and the address to which they are signing matches the name and the address on the voter list. So if you are going to disqualify a signature, I think it is very important to identify the reason, and you want to do that because if you do have to disqualify a signature, and if somebody has to amend their nomination petition, they need to know why the signature has been disqualified. And you can come up with codes, and you can use whatever you want. For example, NR could stand for not registered. WA could stand for wrong address. I mean, you could think about IL, illegible. You just can't read anything, including the printed signature that was identified on the petition. Hopefully the people turning in the petitions will have provided you with more than the 10 signatures required for a statutory town nomination petition. So disqualifying 1 or 2 signatures should not bring the threshold below the 10 signature requirement. If a nomination petition needs to be cured by or amended by adding more signatures, what you want to do is you want to provide a brand new blank petition to that person. And the reason for that is if you look at what the affidavit of or the acceptance of nomination says, what the person signing that says, that they accept the nomination of the people who have signed their petition. And so if you need more signature, so they sign after all the signatures have been obtained. So you can't add signatures and have the affidavit be legitimate or real. So what you do is if you need to add more, just give them a blank one. They go out, get more signatures, the affidavit of circulator is signed, the acceptance of nomination is signed. So it's as if you gave them 2 at once, but this time you're giving them another one. However, if the petition needs to be fixed or cured, and what you're fixing is something wrong with the affidavit of circulator, or there's an incomplete acceptance of nomination, for example, they didn't date it or something like that, then what you do is you return that original petition to the circulator, or actually to the candidate, who may or may not be the circulator, for the correction. And it's a matter of adding something, or the wrong date or the wrong year. I mean, there's all kinds of things. So new signatures, new petitions, fixing the circulator affidavit or the acceptance, just return it to them. Any questions about any of this before I move on?
No questions yet.
Okay, let's move on to the next slide then. Okay, and here's a few things that I think that would be very important to consider when you're doing the signature verification. First of all, I strongly suggest that you don't wait until the petition submission deadline, which I believe is January 22nd, comes before you verify the signatures. In other words, when somebody submits their nomination petition, you date stamp it. You count the number of signatures to make sure there's at least 10 signatures on the petition, and then I would immediately go ahead and check the signatures, either using a voting list provided to you by the county clerk and recorder, or you can use DEO access if you have access to that. Okay, so in other words, don't wait. I know it's only 10 signatures, but who knows what your life's going to be like on the 22nd. And if people need to fix something, this just gives them more time before the amendment deadline to take care of what they need to fix. The other thing that I want to mention is to talk about part-time residency, because this seems to come up a lot during these elections, where people have two residences. One is in your community, and one could be in another community in Colorado, or it could be another state. And you know that perhaps somebody is a snowbird and they spend the winters in some warm place. But state statute really does not contemplate how to deal with part-time residency. So here are some tips that I think and some things that I think are important to consider. First of all, where is the person registered to vote? If the person is registered to vote in your community, then he qualifies not only as an elector, but somebody who can run for office. And I gave you the statute 31-10-201 subparagraph 3 that also talks about how to determine residency. It could be, where their automobile is registered, other kinds of things. But I think what you want to do again is you want to err on the side of the voter, in this case, the candidate, and it isn't your responsibility to check to see have they lived for 12 consecutive months prior to the date of the election. And I know that the requirement of residing 12 consecutive days before the day, or months before the day of the election, is something that people get hung up on. You can be living in another place temporarily during the winter or during a job or something like that, and still not violate that 12-month requirement. And if you have any questions about that, and you know what I'm going to say, contact your municipal attorney. And finally, in small communities where you kind of know everybody and everybody knows you, whether that's a good thing or not, do not rely on what you think or what you think you know. It's important to verify, verify, verify. Now, I'm going to stop here in case there are some questions about that before I move on to the last bullet on this page. Anything from
We
anybody?
do have a couple questions that have come in as you've been covering material on the slide. So first, there's a question on, after we've given the circulator a new petition for new signatures, can we add the old SIGs to the new SIGs?
Well, that's what you do. In other words, let's say they turn in 12 and you wind up with 8 good ones or valid ones, then those 8 are still valid. They just need to get at least 2 more in order to meet the minimum threshold. So they're not the petition itself is not disqualified, only the signatures that don't meet the requirements.
Great, thank you. And then one more, although we welcome to keep coming. If you give them a new nomination petition, but they only needed, I think this kind of maybe just duplicated a little bit, but they only needed 2 corrected signatures, can they only bring the 2 corrected signatures on the new packet to be combined with the old packet?
But the answer is yes.
Yeah.
However, if they only need 2, I would encourage them to get more than 2, which is what you did originally, because what if they turn in 2 and one of them is bad? Guess what? You got to give them another petition. So if you do give them the petition, a new one, I would say, here's how many you need. I encourage you to get more. Again, don't tell them how many because you don't know, but just encourage them to get more. It's a cushion. It's a cushion. And we don't want to have to keep doing this 2 or 3 times.
Sounds great. And then we've had one more come in asking, should we verify signatures off a voter list or get a limited score access from the SOS, from the state?
You can do either, because remember, what you're verifying is the name and the address. Now, if you use DEO access, I want you to, let me back up, let me say it a different way. When you get a paper copy or even an electronic copy of a voter list, that is frozen in time. You get, whatever the date of the list you get, that's where the information is. But with DEO access, it updates on a daily basis. So what you have to do is you have to make sure that, because remember, a person's got to be registered before they sign. If you look at DEO access, you have to make sure their voter registration date is before the date on the petition. But you can use either, and I've done both. I've done both. It just depends on, you know, which is easier for you. And of course, you know, the county clerks are getting ready for the presidential primary. So, you know, hopefully they'll be able to stop and print you off a list. Okay.
Thanks. One last one that's kind of come in before we move ahead again is for DEO access, it asks for the CRS that gives municipality the authority to verify signatures. Do you have that off the top of your head?
I do. I do. It's 31-10-910.3. And you just type that into the box. That's
I
all.
just did. So let's see.
31-10-910.3. Okay, great. Thank you.
I think I just added that in the chat for everybody.
Thank you very much. All right. So moving on to the last one, and we covered this a little bit last time. No, back to.
Sorry. Got it.
That's fine. Thank you. You know, so I know what I'm thinking, and I don't always communicate it all that well, so thank you. So we talked a little bit about this in the last webinar, and it talks about the number of petitions that somebody is eligible to sign. And that is, they can sign as many petitions as there are positions to be voted on. So if your mayor is on the ballot, regardless of the number of candidates, and one person can only sign one petition for mayor. And depending upon the number of trustees you have, if it's 3, if you're lucky enough not to have any vacancies or, you know, appointments in vacancies to fill, but if it's 3 and you've got 5 candidates, then a person can sign 3 of the trustee petitions. If for some reason they sign more, like they sign both mayoral candidate petitions, and because you're only dealing with 10 signatures, this should not be that hard to figure out. The latest date, the one that is like closest to the election. So if it's like somebody signs one on January 4th and then somebody signs one on January 5th, the signature that was signed on the 5th cannot be counted. Okay, that's the one that you disqualify. Now, if there are, let's look at the trustees. You've got 3 people running, 3 trustee petitions, and you've got 4 candidates, and someone signed all 4 on the same day. You have no idea which one was signed last, so guess what? You have to disqualify the signatures on every single one of those petitions. But if 3 of them were signed on the same day and the 4th one was signed later, then it's the later one that was disqualified. And I know we had a lot of questions about this last time, so I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions about this now.
We do have a couple of questions trickling in. First one kind of came in as you started on this, so it reflects back a little bit on the past one too, or the past question too, but has heard that it's SOS and counties are freezing voter registration because of the primary election. This would mean that people won't be able to register and or be added to the registry by the time of our election occurs. Any tips?
Well, yeah, that is true, but hopefully there'll be enough people who are already registered to be able to find the 10 signatures that are needed. You know, I mean, there's not much we can do. We have to rely on their lists, and if their lists are frozen and somebody signed and it's not on the list, it appears to be that they're, you know, not registered. Although I doubt it will happen, but if they can have a document that proves that they registered, maybe you can use that as your proof. If this gets to be an issue with people, let me know, and we'll see if we could come up with something that works. But you're right, they are going to be freezing. I mean, they're running 3 elections. They're already in the middle of their presidential primary election. So,
thank you. And then towards that part, again, we had some questions on this last time, and again, some this time, is what if the earlier dated signature is turned in later than a petition you've already certified is complete with a signature from the same person, but signed later than the petition turned in later?
Well, then you'll have to go back, and if that one signature is enough to disqualify the entire petition, then the person's got to go back and get a signature to replace it. It's very clear in statute that disqualification is not determined by the date the petition was submitted.
Yeah. And then can one person sign for one mayor and 2 trustees?
If you're voting on at least 2 trustees, the answer is yes. And of course, 1 mayor, yes.
Great.
So it's the number of petitions for trustees is equal to the number of positions that will appear on the ballot.
And then our final one, I may ask for a little more clarification, but this goes back to the freezing for ballots, basically asking, what about freezing for ballots? So I'm thinking this means maybe a little more context on what's happening with the freezing, but I invite this person to email more.
Yeah. The ballots aren't being frozen. It's just the data entry. The county clerks do data entry throughout the day and day after day and day after day. They have to identify their database that will be used to send out the ballots for the March 5th election. So at some point they can't keep, after they send the list, the database to their printer, they can't keep sending 2 or 3 signatures or 10 signatures, whatever. So they establish a freeze date, and anybody after that date who registers to vote or makes a change, that will not appear on what I call the big list. And if those people don't get ballots in the county run election, then they can contact the county and get replacement ballots. But it's so that they can provide the list to their print vendors with some degree of certainty. That's why they're freezing the data entry. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, and quick follow-up from that same asker was, this would impact our supplemental list for registration for ballots or tabulation. So if I have someone come in and ask for a ballot on March 20th, but I don't have them as a registered voter, the question is, what do you do in those situations?
That is a good question. You can ask them when they registered to vote. They should have gotten, if they registered to vote online or something like that, they should have, well, no, they wouldn't get that kind of receipt. You could, I guess at this point, and you might want to check with your attorney, you might be able to ask them to sign and notarize a statement that they did register to vote. That's about the only thing we could do, because you're right, it will probably impact the supplemental list, which I don't think will be very, very big, but nonetheless, it could impact people. So I would check with your attorney about whether he would feel that a form, and you could create the form and just hand it to them, and then they could go and if you're a notary, you could even notarize it. But I would check with your attorney on this. It's pretty rare that this happens, although it's going to happen in every presidential election year, probably.
Okay. Yeah,
that's the best answer I can give you.
Great. They said they did bring up a clarifying point that the county is not unfreezing until after April. So, but thank you. So I think we got that one.
Okay.
Couple other questions that came in are similar. It's like, so one of our clerks here had a nomination circulator ask for a copy of a registered voter list. They are also a current trustee whose term will be up, and wondering if this is an ethical ask, something you can respond to.
Tell them to contact the county. It's not your list, it's their list. It's the county's list. So they can request that information from the county, and they'll probably have to pay for it. But it's not your list. It's not your list.
Great. Let's see. We've got What if the earlier dated signature is turned in later than a petition you've already certified as complete with a signature from the same person, but signed later than the petition turned in later?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm
So,
sorry. I think we asked that one before. I think you got that. Yep.
okay. All right. So is that it for now? And you can
Let's
always
see.
ask later.
Yep, and we had someone just send in kind of like you had recommended here, just a little piece of advice that they usually call the county and ask if a person's registered as well as
That's
part of their practice.
great idea. Great
Yeah.
idea. Yeah.
So
But hopefully that you've instructed your candidates and they've instructed their petition circulators, if it's not them, to get more than 10 signatures. So that disqualifying someone because of, the earlier version or the freeze or something like that will not impact and, the petition itself and bring the number of signatures below 10. I know there are people out there, you tell them 10 is what they need, that's what they're going to turn in. They run the risk of having to amend their petition. And all you want to do by telling them to get more is to keep them from having to do that. So anyway, so if you didn't do it this time, 2 years from now, you know how to do that. Okay. All right.
thanks.
All right.
That's it for now. If you're ready to move ahead.
I'm ready to move ahead. All right. So let's talk about the format of the ballot. So first, what I want to do is I want to talk about the order of the items on the ballot. So you want to list your candidates first, and I suggest that you put the mayoral candidates at the very beginning because the mayor's position is a little higher ranking than the Board of Trustees. And so then after the mayoral candidates, then you're going to put your Board of Trustee candidates. Now, I will tell you that you will not find this order that I've just identified in state statute. You're doing it because it makes sense. What you will find in state statute is that the names are arranged by lot. What is lot? It could be drawing the names out of a hat. I'm working with a municipality on a vacancy election, and that's what we did. They had this great red, white, and blue hat. Typed the names on a piece of paper. The piece of paper was the same size, the same width. The names were in the same font. Folded them up the same way, stuck it in the hat. Clerk picked the name out of the hat, and that's how they did it. You can do it by picking a number, whatever, but they're not alphabetical. They are arranged by lot. So it's always a good idea to invite people to the drawing so they can see that what you're doing is up and up, which it is, even if they don't show up, but at least give them the opportunity to show up and see what they're doing. Then, if you also are taking the opportunity of putting ballot items on your regular election ballot, after the candidates, you would put the ballot items. The first ones are going to be TABOR, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, the financial issues, tax issues, debt issues, debrucing, all that kind of stuff. They are the first ones to go. And if you have any that are on the ballot that are got to you by citizen petition, they come before the ones that are referred to the ballot by your governing body. After the TABOR items, then you would have your non-TABOR items. So, and again, I suggest that the non-TABOR items would be arranged by the date submitted to the ballot. Either if a citizen petition came in to, let's say, what would non-TABOR be like? Anything that doesn't have to do with money. I can't think of a good example that makes sense. Maybe somebody declaring that in your community you've changed all your street signs or something like that, or you painted all your hydrants or something like that. It would be arranged by the date, and then if the governing body puts something on the ballot after that, that would go next. So again, that would be kind of the order of that kind of thing. Any questions about this?
I'm not seeing any new questions come in.
Okay, then let's go to the next slide. Okay, and then on the ballot format, For the candidates, if you are hand counting your ballots and you've determined the names, the order by lot, then what you'll do is you're going to type in the person's name, and then you're going to have a blank line where somebody can do an X or a check mark or something, but in other words, an indication. So it would be it would either be to the left of their name or to the right of their name. To me, it makes sense to have the name first and then the blank line. If you are counting ballots by machine, then, and you got somebody who's helped you to get the ballot format to be counted by machine, generally what they do is they provide either a circle or an oval that needs to be completely filled in following each name. Then the other thing you want to do in the heading, before the actual names appear, you want to identify what the race is. So it would be like mayor. And then in parentheses, you want to identify how many they get to vote for. Obviously, it would be mayor, parentheses, vote for one or vote for not more than one, end parentheses. For board of trustees, it would be, then the heading would be board of trustees, followed by, in parentheses, vote for not more than 3 or whatever the number is, or vote for no more than 3. Now, the next one is kind of important because it deals, I've seen ballots where they put the length of the term of office. So it'll say 4 years. Or if you're still doing a 2-year term, it'll say 2 years. That is not required. And quite honestly, I don't think it's necessary. I have not heard of anybody voting or not voting for someone because they didn't like the term of office of the position. So it would just be the heading, vote for 1, vote for not more than 3, or whatever it happens to be, their names according to lot. That's all you need to do. And especially where you are having positions on the ballot where the candidates will fill both the full term and a shortened term, which only occurs because there had been an appointment to a vacancy since the last election. You cannot list the terms of office because that's not how the length of term of office is determined. It is merely determined by the number of votes that each candidate receives. The persons who receive the highest number of votes get the full term, and then the remainder get the shortened term. Questions?
Nope, this seems much more clear cut for folks. We're not seeing questions.
Oh, I'm glad, because we're going to talk about when we get to canceling the election.
We've got time for questions then. We're making time.
Okay, all right. Then the other thing, before we move on to the next slide, and this was something that I was thinking about today as I was reviewing, I wanted to talk a little bit about the ballot content that's not listed in this presentation. And the information on what the ballots look like are found in Title 31, Article 10, Part 9, which says paper ballots. Because both polling place election and mail ballot elections use paper ballots, at least kind of that. So you're going to find them all together. So if you are doing a polling place election, your ballot needs to have 2 ballot stubs at the top. And each of the ballot stubs has the same number, and they're numbered in order. And you can either have them pre-printed, or you can, as you hand out the ballots in a polling place election, you could number them yourself. The first stub is cut off before the person takes the ballot to the booth to vote, and the second ballot is cut off after the person voted, but before it's placed in the ballot box. In a mail ballot election, there are no ballot stubs, period. There's not 2, there's not 1, there are 0, all right? Also, I'm going to give you the statute. It's 31-10-902, subparagraph 4, which means there's a parentheses around the 4 and then another parentheses around B. It talks about an endorsement that goes on the reverse side of the ballot. And basically what it is it gives the name of the municipality, the date of the election, and then the signature of the clerk. And that goes on the back. And that's put on there so that if somebody decides to play funny with the ballots and photocopy or reprint, you'll be able to tell if the endorsement's not on the back that it's a faux ballot and should not be counted. In addition to that, on a mail ballot election, and again, I'm going to give you the citation, 31-10-910, subparagraph 2, subparagraph 3, there is a requirement that in a mail ballot election, there is a warning that appears on the ballot. So it would be kind of, you got your, on the front, your title, and this is true, you have a title on your ballot for paper. It'll say the name of your municipality, regular municipal election, the date of the election, and then there is the warning. The warning is in statute, just copy it directly as you see it, and then that's when you would list your candidates, your ballot items, etc. So while that's not in this slide, I wanted to make sure that you all had that information. Comments?
No, still quiet here. Just absorbing information, it looks like.
Good. All right. All right. So then the next slide. Okay. So on your ballot items, then what you'll do is you'll have the ballot title, which basically starts with the word shall and then whatever the language is. Then you have a line that says yes, and again, you either do a blank line after that or a circle or no. And if you have a Tabor item, that ballot title needs to scream at you by being printed in all capital letters, and that is a requirement in the Colorado Constitution. But if it's a non-Tabor item, or what we call a ballot question, you just use your normal typeface. First word of the sentence starts with a capital word, and then the rest of them are just in lowercase. So that's just how those go. And the numbering system for ballot items, you can pretty much do what you want. It's your responsibility to number the ballot items. You can either follow the Secretary of State rules, which I believe if it's a citizen-driven, it's like a number like 300. If it's put on the ballot by a governing body, I believe it's 3A. Or you can just say ballot, and here's what I would suggest you do. If it's Tabor, it'll be a ballot issue, and then you could put number 1 or number 2. If it's a non-Tabor, it's a ballot question, again, number 1. So you could have ballot issue number 1, you could have ballot question number 1, and that distinguishes between Tabor and non-Tabor. So the numbering system is totally up to you. Questions? I'll pause.
No questions yet.
Okay, good, good. You guys know what you're doing then. All right, so let's move on. And now we're going to talk about canceling the election. Okay, the first requirement for canceling the election is that the governing body must have passed an ordinance that does 2 things. It sets a deadline for filing a notice of intent to be a write-in candidate, and you should have that deadline in your calendar, and I believe it's 64 days before the day of the election. So that's part number 1. And then the second part says that if on, and again, I don't have these numbers in front of me, but they should be in your calendar. I think it's 63 days before the day of the election. If you have, you're only voting on candidates and you have the same number or fewer candidates than you have positions available, and that includes write-in candidates who filed that notice of intent by that deadline, then under certain circumstances, you can cancel the election. Now, I've been talking about this for years, and I am guessing that pretty much everybody has such an ordinance. If you're not sure, you need to be sure, and you need to go back and check to see, but it's got to be an ordinance. So if you've got the ordinance that contains those two parts, then you can cancel your election under the following conditions. As I just said, the only matter before voters is the election of officers. If you have any ballot item on your ballot, even if you have the same or fewer number of candidates as positions to be voted on, you cannot cancel your election. And then it has you've also received, and so the second bullet is what I just said, that it includes your write-in candidates, and they can cancel the election by resolution, and they can declare the candidates elected. And I want to focus on the word elected because this has come up recently, including a conversation I had today with a reporter who was trying to understand the election law. So let me talk about the difference here between elected and appointed. So if somebody files a nomination petition and the petition is valid and they get their name on the ballot or ready to be on a ballot, then, and you cancel the election, then they are declared to be elected. And having been, it's as if they ran in the election, they got enough votes, and they get elected, and they get, whoops, we have a, yeah, one more, there we go. And it's as if they had an election, they got elected, and they are elected, so they get to serve throughout their 4-year term or 2-year term, if the case may be, but they are elected. Now, if let's say you have 3 trustee positions on the ballot and you only have 2 candidates, and all the other conditions apply for canceling the election. Again, you cancel the election, you adopt a resolution that says you cancel the election. These 2 people whose names would have appeared on the ballot are elected, but now you have a vacancy to which you appoint someone. And the reason for the distinction is because a person appointed to fill a position only serves until the very next regular election, where the persons who are elected can fill out their term of office, and for a 4-year term, it's not the next election, but it's the election after that. So I'm probably going to repeat myself in a bunch of next couple of slides, but I want to pause and I want to make sure everybody understands the difference.
We do have some clarification questions there coming up. So first, there's like, what should we do if there's no ordinance and we can't cancel? Then like a sub question that came in after this was thinking that 31-10-507 was the only needed authority to cancel an election.
All right, okay, so first of all, if you don't have an ordinance, see if you can adopt one before your election in April. And 507, 507 basically says what I have talked about and makes reference to the requirement for an affidavit of intent to be a write-in candidate. So you have to have both, because if you don't have a deadline for somebody to file an affidavit of intent to be a write-in candidate, they can be a write-in candidate on election day. And if you don't have a deadline and they can file as a write-in candidate at any time, you cannot cancel an election, because you are not giving somebody who decides at the very last minute that they can do better than anybody else, and everybody else is on it, you're denying them the opportunity to run for office. That's why and the reason we put that deadline in statute is to do exactly that, is to enable people to be able to cancel their election if they meet certain requirements. So hopefully that answers the question. So if you don't have an ordinance, get one passed. Get one passed. Go on the listserv as soon as you're done with this webinar. Ask somebody for a copy of their ordinance and then do it before the election so that you can cancel the election.
Right. And then kind of one last question there is, what happens if there are fewer people running for office than there are seats?
Well, just as I said, the people who are on the ballot, if you're going to cancel the election, the people who are on the ballot, even if they're not enough, let's say you've got 3 open positions and you've got 2 candidates, those 2 people, after you cancel the election, they are declared to be elected, and that 3rd seat where nobody filled it is now declared to be a vacancy and is filled according to the vacancy procedures, which would either be by appointment, first choice, or by another special election, or by a special election. But the absence of the required number of people does not deny the 2 people who are on the ballot, or the folks who are on the ballot, regardless of the number, from being determined to be elected.
Thank you.
Okay?
Let's see, just checking. And I think that's it for now.
All right, let's kind of move on because I think I repeat myself here. Nope, you went backwards.
Yep, I hit the wrong arrow, sorry.
Oh, that's fine, that's fine. Listen, my life, I get it, no problem here. So again, no election can be canceled without that ordinance, and it's got to have both provisions. I mean, I've seen ordinances that only talk about write-in, but they don't mention anything about canceling the election. So it's got to have both elements to it. And again, as I said previously, without such an ordinance, you still have to provide for the ability to someone to be a write-in candidate at any time prior to and including the day of the election. So, get that ordinance adopted. And then we're going to talk a little bit about sort of like a however, but we'll do that in just a moment. And then statute says that no election can be canceled in part. Here's what that means. You've got candidates and you've got a ballot item. On the candidate side, you have either exactly the same number of people running as you have positions available, or you have fewer, but you still have this item on the ballot. So you cannot remove the candidate portion from the ballot and only have people vote on the item. They both have to be together, because otherwise you're canceling one part of the election but not the other, and that is not permitted. So think of it as all or nothing. Additionally, let's say you have the mayor on the ballot this time along with trustees, and you only have 1 person running for mayor, but you've got 4 people running for 3 trustee positions. In other words, you have more people running than you have positions available. You cannot take the mayor off the ballot and only vote on the trustees. Again, it's all or nothing. However, 1 candidate for mayor, 3 candidates for 3 trustee positions, you can cancel your election. And then when you do cancel the election, you do a notice, and it has to be published like any other legal notice, and then you would post it in your polling location and in not less than 1 other public place. And there's that citation that somebody mentioned, 31-10-507. Questions?
We do have one kind of following up on the vacancies. So
Okay.
those seats that are filled by declaring elected due to cancellation, are they not appointed until April 2nd? Or more clarifying, are they not sworn in until that election date passes?
Great question. I'm not sure I answer it, but it's a great question. So you can cancel the election almost more than 2 months before the actual date of the election. And the reason we do it so far in advance is that it keeps you from having to go through the expense of printing up ballots and that kind of thing. In the old days, and hopefully nobody has this in their codes, you could cancel the election. I think it was like 20 days before the day of the election. Well, of course, now with UOCAV and all that stuff, that doesn't work. But we moved it back to being sort of near the nomination petition guidelines. However, the people who are currently in office get to fill out their term of office, and their term will not end until new people are sworn in, and they would normally be sworn in if there was an election. It would be after the election. So what you have to do is you have to wait until after the actual election date before you can swear in the people if you cancel the election. So again, great question. So you can't just say, okay, 63 days before the election, we're going to swear in the new people, because you have prohibited the sitting trustees from completing their term of office.
Great. What if a trustee is running for mayor and that would indicate 4 open trustee positions and you have 4 candidates running? Would you be able to cancel the election?
Well, first of all, if it would depend on whether that trustees, well, let me back up. If the trustee is running for mayor midterm and loses, he's still a trustee. So you don't put his position on the ballot. However, if the trustee's term would end at the time you'd have the election and he chooses to run for mayor instead of running for re-election, then you could put that, let's see, let me make sure I understand. If he's running for mayor, instead of running, the vacancy would still not be considered to exist until after you knew if that person won the election, so you would also not put it on the ballot. So in other words, that's what happened this election that I'm working on. So let me say it again. If the person is running midterm and gets elected, after you do the canvass, then the position he was in is declared a vacancy and is handled after the election. If the person decides not to run for election, runs for mayor and wins, then there would be the vacancy afterwards. So the short answer, as I bumbled through this, is no, you don't put it on the ballot. It would not be an extra position. It would be dealt with as a vacancy after the election and after the canvass is done. And if you need clarification, ask again.
Great. No, I think you worked through that and we could follow the logic in real time, but you definitely rewrite your question or add a note if that did not answer it for you.
Sure, please, please.
That was our last question in this section right now. So.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide then. Okay, so just to reiterate, write-in candidates, if you have the ordinance with a deadline, then they have to, in order to be a write-in candidate, they have to file an affidavit of intent. And basically it could be a statement says, I intend to be a write-in candidate, and they get it notarized and they file it with you. It's prior to 64 days before the day of the election. If you don't have an ordinance, there's no affidavit of intent required, and any name can be written in at any time. So if you have an ordinance and you have the deadline, and they're considered to be eligible write-in candidates, after the end of the list of the names of people who filed petitions, you have a blank line. And so for the number of eligible write-in candidates, so if you have 2 eligible write-in candidates, you have 2 blank lines, because somebody could vote on either, one or the other. If there are no eligible write-in candidates, there are no blank lines, and people ask me that all the time because it's not clear in statute. It talks about on paper ballots that after the names you have to have enough blank lines for the number of positions, but that's only if you have eligible candidates. So without an ordinance, let's say you've got let's say you have 5 trustee positions on the ballot. You don't have an ordinance. So anybody could be a write-in at any time. You have to have the 5 names listed, drawn by lot, and then 5 blank lines. So again, it makes a lot of sense to have this ordinance requiring people to be considered to be eligible write-in candidates. So.
No questions coming in on that, but I've learned ordinance is our best friend, right?
Right, exactly, when it comes to elections. And then the next slide. Okay, so now we're dealing, here we go with vacancies. I cannot tell you the number of clerks I have talked to, and they're wanting to know about the petitions and their election and the number of people. And the first question I ask is, what are your terms of office? And clerks will tell me that some of the terms are 4 years and some of the terms are 2 years. And I respond by saying, no, that is not true. It's the only time there could be a difference is that the mayor might have 2 years and the trustees have 4 years. But all your trustees have to have the same length of term. So what happens is that there is a situation where somebody gets appointed to a vacant position, and in the next election, that position shows up on the ballot as a shortened term position along with all the full term positions. In other words, it's not the election where that position would normally be on the ballot, but because the law requires that if in the first 2 years there's a vacancy, a person gets appointed and they have to run, and then they have to run again when their position would be on the ballot. So people will see 4-year positions, 2-year positions. There's some kind of a records are not kept very well, or there's a change in the clerk or whatever. They don't, they're trying to figure out what to do. They say, oh, look, we had 2-year positions on the ballot and 4 years, so that must be what we have. The answer is no, that's only a one-time thing. So I wrote this hopefully to explain how that works. When the number of candidates running for office, when you canceled your election, this is only for canceling the election. If you cancel the election, when the number of candidates is the same as the number of available full-term offices, you cancel the election, the people are declared to be elected for the full term. When the number of candidates for office is fewer than the number of available, then the people who are on the ballot, even though they don't fill all the positions, they are declared to be elected. And then anybody where there was a vacant position, then what happens is, so 3 people, 4 positions on the ballot, 3 candidates, cancel the election, they're declared to be elected for the full terms, and then there is a vacancy, and then that vacancy is filled by appointment, and the person selected to, then that position is again up on the ballot in 2 years, and that person can choose to run for 2 more years. And then this answers the question before: the persons declared elected after canceling don't take office until the current term expires. This is the hardest thing to teach people to understand. So if you are confused, I get it. I get it. Just remember, if you're new into a job, if this is your first election and it looks like in the past that people had 2-year terms and 4-year terms, it is because there had been vacancies that were filled by appointment. And it doesn't mean that you have both 4-year and 2-year terms of office. That's why it's important to keep good election records, so you can figure all this stuff out and not carry this on into the future when you shouldn't. Questions?
You got a shout out, not a question, of just great explanation. Thank you.
I think that, go ahead. No questions?
Nope, just another comment here, just saying to check your charter because
if you're a statutory town, you do not have a charter. Statutory towns do not have charters. So thank you. So obviously we've got some great chartered municipalities here. So yay for you. You get to check your charter, but for the statutory towns whose elections are primarily in April, there is no charter to check. I just want to make sure that's clear.
No, thanks for making that clear. And then we did have a quick question here on to your knowledge, is there any reason someone who is a term limited could not be appointed to a vacancy?
The Constitution is very clear that someone who is term limited has to sit out 4 years. And because trustee positions are voted on at large, they're all considered to be the same type of position. Now, if somebody was term limited as a trustee and wanted to run as mayor immediately, that could happen, and vice versa, but they would have to sit out. And so I would think that they would have to sit out. But again, that's a great question for your municipal attorney, because appointments do not, as far as I remember, appointments do not contribute to the time period for being term limited. Moving forward. So if you're appointed to fill a 2-year term, then it's only until you get elected to another term that you start your term limit countdown. Yeah, so want to check on that.
Great.
As I tell people all the time, I'm not an attorney, and I can provide, administrative ideas and suggestions, and I can definitely interpret the law, but when it comes to legal questions, I am not the one to answer, and quite honestly, nor are our fellow clerks. As helpful as they are, and I love that about all of you, sometimes you just need to go to your attorney, even if it costs you money, and I get that. So.
But great advice to keep it going right. So, yep, we do have one more question here on if you have 4, so this goes back to a math question. If you have 4 trustee seats up for election, 3 are full term and 1 is a 2-year term, and have 4 candidates and cancel the election, how do you determine the shortened term?
Let's go to the next slide, and then we'll talk about this. Okay, so, and I think the next one should be the last one. So you could find it. Okay, all right. By law, if you have the way you determine who gets the full year and who gets the shortened term is by the number of votes each person receives. So technically, in a black and white world, technically, if you have both full and shortened term positions on the ballot, you cannot cancel the election. However, I always suggest an idea which you really need to discuss with your attorney. And here is my idea. And this is from the practical sense. Instead of going through the entire, having to print ballots and hire judges and count ballots and feed the judges and do all that kind of stuff, I always suggest that if you have a situation like this and everybody agrees on a process whereby you can do a lot drawing, the way similar to what you did to get their names on the ballot, that they would agree that, like the short straw gets the shortened term or whatever, but they agree ahead of time that they are willing to take the chance. Or there might be someone who says, I'm okay about, just doing the shortened term. If your attorney thinks it would be okay from a legal and an administrative perspective, then you could, in my opinion, go ahead and draw the positions by lot. If the attorney says, nope, you can't, then don't cancel your election. And please don't do it without making sure that every candidate agrees. Because if one doesn't agree, I don't think you should do it either. I will be, we're looking at amending the municipal election code, and I'm going to be talking with the powers that be at CML to figure out a process by which we can do this so it doesn't cost people money. And quite honestly, statistics show that about a third of you guys are going to be able to cancel your election. So that's what I would suggest. Again, I'm not an attorney, it's just a suggestion. Your attorney needs to have the final say on this, because if somebody challenges you on it, he or she's going to be the one defending you in court. That's the last slide. We're close. Oh, we're a little after 1.
A little over, yep.
Yeah, if you need to go, that's fine, but I'm willing to stay and answer any questions, additional questions you might have.
Sure, we've got just one more question that came in. We'll see if any others trickle in, but we will try to wrap this up to respect your time and everybody else's time. But there's a question on, we have 2 appointed seats from 2022 that are up for election this year. Does that mean both of these seats would be 2-year shortened terms?
Well, so it depends on when the term normally would end. If the appointment was made, if you have 4-year terms, and read me again when the appointments were made.
They were appointed in 2022.
Right. You don't say when they were appointed. If they were appointed after the election in 2022, and because there were vacancies, then those were before your terms. They would have to run again in 2024 and then again in 2026 when the term actually ended. However, if these were appointed and the original the vacancy was in a position that was originally voted on in 2020, then it would be up in 2024 and it would be a full year term. And if that's too confusing, call me. We can talk about it. Yeah. But it depends on the appointment. And if you go back to the slides last webinar, we talk about when the vacancies occur and how you deal with the elections. So
yeah, this individual says thank you. They're going to have to do a little research on the original timeline and may follow up with you separately.
Perfect. I'm happy to talk to you. Absolutely happy to talk to you.
Great. And then for best practices, should clerks notarize a nomination petition?
You can. I mean, it's up to you. It depends on how hard it is to find a notary in your town. A lot of clerks do it. A lot of clerks don't do it. But whatever you do, be consistent from petition to petition to petition.
Great. And then one more on that canceling elections question again. If there are wards and 2 wards are short-term terms and there are 3 at-large offices are full term, does that influence whether you can cancel the eletion? And okay. I'm happy to read that again.
Say the question again.
If there are wards and 2 wards are short-term terms and there are 3 at-large offices are full terms, does that influence if you can cancel the election?
Yeah, so if I understand the question, you're voting on both wards and at-large? Again, it's
yes, that's correct.
That's the case. It's like the mayor and the trustees. If you can't eliminate one of them and keep the other. It's got to be both, even though in that situation where you vote for yeah. So the answer is no. You cannot cancel the election. And that would be considered canceling the election in part because they're 2 separate types of positions. One is only for the people in your particular ward, but the other is for municipality wide. So you have to keep them both on.
Great. And that does look like our last question.
All right. Well, I'm always available if you have any things. I don't know if anybody's received any nomination petitions yet, but the idea is that we give you this information before you need it. You know how to reach me, and I hope you will. And I think Denise has just some final remarks. But I want to thank you for spending time with me. I really do appreciate it. And I do these because I hope they're helpful to you and you find them useful.
Yeah, and I'll just echo you, Karen. Thank you, everybody, for attending and making the most of this opportunity. You're getting thank yous on the chat, Karen, as well from participants. So thank you for always being willing to share your expertise and helping us run the best elections we can across the state, right? And then just wanted to remind everybody, we will get this recording with the materials, the link to your CMCA credit form. I'll try to get that up by the end of the week, probably Wednesday, Thursday, but we'll send out an email to let you know it's out there. And then also just our last 2 sessions in this webinar series are coming up. March 14th, we've got Canvas recounts and final election questions. And then our final session is after elections on May 8th with an election debrief and tales to tell, kind of learn from each other, share some experiences. So that's what we've got coming up. Sorry. Thank you everybody again for attending and hope you have a great afternoon.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.